everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald. This week, my guest is Michael Gershe. Michael wears several hats in the work that he does. He's the founder of the Magic of Life Foundation, an author, speaker, has spoken at Tedx Kent State, a comedian, a college advisor for the last 21 years at Kent State University in the Aeronautics and Engineering department, and a true advocate against drunk driving. To add another hat to the list, he has a passion for photography and has recently had his photos shared in a gallery in Ohio. Michael was born in New York. He then moved to Miami, Florida as a young child, and then went off to college in Ohio and never left the state. At the age of only 8 weeks old, him and his family were in a tragic car crash that was caused by a drunk driver. That crash took his mother Barbara's life at the young age of 28. Michael shares more about how the loss of his mom shaped his life and his story. You will hear about a woman named Dolly, who was at first hired to take care of Michael and his brother Jeff while their dad worked, but she quickly went from being hired to truly becoming part of the family. This is a great story about how blood does not determine who cares for you the most. Dolly is celebrating a very special 90th birthday this month. Michael shares how men don't always feel so comfortable sharing their vulnerability, as he learned just a few years ago that he was still dealing with survivor's guilt from the crash that happened 51 years ago. This is a very important conversation. Please go to themagicoflife.com to learn more about the incredible program that Michael has created to help save lives. Please subscribe to the Today is the Day Changemakers YouTube channel. Stream this podcast on all streaming sites. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at Today is the Day Live It. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of the Zach G. Uploader Kids Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that funds children living with financial barriers take ongoing performing arts lessons. Please visit uploaderkids.org for more information. And for more information about this podcast and my ongoing consulting services, visit todayisthedayliveit.com. Have a great week, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Grunwald, and welcome back to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. Every week, I'm very, very lucky to interview the incredible change makers that are out there in this world making a difference every single day. And today I have Michael Gershe with me. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jody. Yourself?
I am doing well as well. And thank you for coming on. I know you're coming to us all the way from Ohio, so welcome.
I am. Thank you very much. A nice rainy day.
Oh, great. Sorry to hear that. Not rainy here in New Jersey. So yeah, a little bit different climates going on right now, but very hot. So as I do each podcast, I like to read the bios from these incredible change makers who are making a difference. And I'm going to read Michael's. Michael Gershe is a survivor of a drunk driving crash that killed his mother and nearly himself when he was just 8 weeks old. Despite breaking almost all of his bones in the crash, he went on to become a collegiate swimmer, comedian, speaker, author, college educator, and photographer. Michael earned his master's degree in higher education administration. He's been at Kent State University for 21 years and is the senior advisor for the College of Aeronautics and Engineering. With over 25 years experience on stage as a comedian and speaker, Michael has presented his programs at schools, colleges, military bases, and a TED Talk. He uses humor, audience participation, and his story for an educational and inspirational message. His topics include impaired driving prevention, alcohol abuse, diversity, student athlete success, and mental health grief. In 2015, he founded the Magic of Life Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helps his mission in eliminating impaired driving, making communities safer, and empowering people to make better choices in life. The foundation has a partnership with the Stowe Municipal Court and Mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving, where he presents his program as part of their diversion program. The organization's annual fundraiser honors local law enforcement for their DUI efforts. And for more information about Michael, and we'll share this again, and the Magic of Life Foundation, go to themagicoflife.org, and that's www.themagicoflife.org. So, Michael, wow, that was a long bio, wasn't it?
I sound busy.
Just a little bit.
I sound like I've done some stuff in life. I was like, is that really me? Huh, interesting.
Yeah, as I always say, it's words on paper, but it takes a lot to get those words there. So
right.
Incredible work. So there's a lot to unpack in your story, as I know. And for those, he also has a book. I have the book right here. I received the book last week and I haven't finished it, to be honest, but it is incredible. It is a very easy read, and it really does highlight his journey through all the things that he has been a part of. And it's The Magic of Life, a son's story of hope after tragedy, grief, and a Speedo. So we're going to get to talking about all of that right now.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I'm not wearing a Speedo now. I'm wearing pants, okay, not a Speedo, not that type of podcast.
Yes, and let's accentuate the fact that he's a comedian. So we'll hear more about the comedy part of your life as well.
Yeah.
So, in many cases, when I do this podcast, when we start in the past, right, we're usually working up to things that have happened in someone's life that has caused them to make a change. In your case, what happened to you was when you were younger, and it was as you were growing up, you really started to understand more and more what the impact was on your life. So, as we heard in your bio, you unfortunately lost your mom to a drunk driver at a very, very young age. So can you share your story with us?
Sure. More than happy to. I was born in New York about 8 weeks after I was born, September 19th, 1970. So we're just, the 51-year anniversary just came up. My father was driving us home from Long Island. My brother, who was 3, was sleeping in the back seat, not wearing his seatbelt because it was the 70s. No one knew where they were anyway, because they're always stuffed down in the cushion. My dad was driving. My mom was next to my father in the front middle seat, and I was next to my mom in a little baby carrier. Again, no car seats, because that didn't come much later on in society. We were less than a mile away from our house in Spring Valley, New York. And when our light turned green, my father started to go through the intersection where a drunk driver plowed through the intersection, T-boned the car. The force of the impact was so great, it woke up the neighbors from around the area, because being 11 o'clock at night, pretty much everyone was sleeping. And back then it was a little bit more of a rural area, but it was so loud, it just woke up everyone else. And when the first responders arrived and people came out, they found 2 mangled metals of mess, because it was, back in 1970, they built cars to last. Not like today, where a shopping cart could hit your car and in the parking lot cost $10,000 worth of damage. But back then, they built cars. So the impact also pushed our car into a telephone pole and split the car all the way up to the dashboard. So imagine the first responders arriving and seeing this. And they found my father, they found my brother, and they found my mother. And my dad was knocked unconscious. They started giving CPR to my mom and my dad. And no one knew I was in the car. The first responders didn't even know I was in the car. It turned out that my aunt, my mom's sister, her brother-in-law lived around that intersection and told the first responders, hey, someone's missing. So someone found me sandwiched between the door and the dash of the car. And the 4 of us were taken to the same hospital. And my mom was taken into surgery. My dad had to get some stitches on his face from the windshield hitting his nose, his forehead, his cheek. Our brother didn't have a scratch on him, which is pretty much a miracle. But you hear about people who sleep in car crashes, or sometimes drunk drivers who hit people, things, and they walk away. Sometimes they run away. And as for me, nearly every bone in my body was broken. My skull was completely fractured from one side of my head to the other. And I was life flighted to another hospital in New York. And my aunt, my dad's sister, lost count of how many blood transfusions I received to stay alive. And she just lost count. I have 3 physical scars on my body from that car, from the transfusions. I have 1 on the inside of my elbow, and here I have 3 on my ankles. Physical scars, because the mental ones stay with you your entire life. Yeah. So what my father was going through at this point in time was the doctors are saying, well, your son is touch and go. We have no idea if he's going to survive, and your wife is in surgery fighting for her life as well. One of those alone is crippling to any human being, but my dad's taken on 2 of these things. Luckily, how I survived, who knows? I'd be put on a special board for months afterwards. They couldn't put me in a cast because I was all cartilage, as an infant is, until the bones heal. I had to be taken to the hospital for months afterwards to make sure I didn't have any brain damage. I'm perfectly fine. My friends will argue that point, but I think I'm okay. But I grew up to be a competitive swimmer. And you would ever think, you're a mom, you've held 2 precious, babies. You would ever think, a child with those injuries would grow up to be somewhat normal, and grew up to be a competitive swimmer. The only thing I ever wanted to do in life was be a comedian, and that was it. And, when I was in junior high about that. And, I know how blessed I am to wake up on a daily basis. Now, the mental scars, we'll probably talk about your entire life. But my mom, who was 28 at the time of the car crash, died due to her injuries. So now, I'm a mother's child who never knew his mom because a drunk driver took that away. I never had the chance to run home from school and say, hey, mom, look what I drew for you. Hey, mom, what's for dinner? Or, hey, mom, those 3 simple words, I love you, because a drunk driver made the wrong decision that night.
And you never had the opportunity to hear it from her either.
Correct. I had those 8 weeks. So when the anniversary comes around, I always, in my birthday, so my birthday is July, and then I think about those 8 weeks I had with her. Did I let her, sleep? Did I make her laugh? All those type of things that you wonder about, and I can never have those answers. And as a comedian, made several people laugh over the years, but the one laugh I never heard, or at least remembered, my mom's, and that's always tough to kind of think about. Yeah, but I've never had that chance. So, that's one of those hard things that comes with this life in terms of not knowing that side of life. It's almost like Back to the Future, where Marty McFly was living one life and all of a sudden he got knocked off this way. So
Yes.
in those 8 weeks, my dad and my mom all had plans for me for, go this way. He's gonna be a doctor, he's gonna be a lawyer, he's gonna be this, he's gonna be that. And then all of a sudden the car crash happens and then we go, oh no, Michael's going this way. And it was all, pretty much like this, because who knows what was going to happen. Would I have brain damage? Would I be physically okay? When I started to learn how to walk, my dad was afraid for me because he thought I was going to fall apart. He didn't think I was ready. Babies are resilient. Somehow they bounce back, I guess, or everything was okay, or just, I think if I was 3, 5, 6 years old, I don't think I would have made it.
Right.
There was something, the powers that be, who knows? I also think my mom saw the car's headlight in that second or two and did something to save my life, like any good parent would do. I have to think that way. It's a positive way going, okay, I think my mom, saved my life in that instant.
Yeah, well, why not? I mean, of course. I mean, this story, you can tell your story, you can tell yourself any story you want at this point, because why not go to the better story that
Right.
she did whatever she could to protect you, as any mom would do. I mean, that's just a natural thing. Now, the thing about it is too, is that, okay, so then after all of that happened, it was just your dad and you and your brother, and it was the three of you. And that's a lot. That's a lot for, if it's the other way where a father's lost, or, it's the same thing, one single parent and a tragedy. And then trying to deal with that tragedy while your son is healing, that's a tremendous amount of stress in a family for sure. And then of course it affects everybody, has a ripple effect for everyone. And I know that there was a special lady that came into your life during this time that really did help. And the story about Dolly is such an incredible story, because I totally do not believe that there are any accidents that happen in life. I really come from the space where I think everything happens for a reason. Sometimes we don't know what those reasons are, just like we have no idea what the reason is that this happened to your mom or to you and your family. But it did help to bring other things into your life at the same time, if we're going to stay positive. So do you want to talk a little bit about the special woman who did come into your life after this accident?
Well, of course, her, my life is her life in a way. And we just had her 90th birthday party. Scratch that out, because if she knows how I told everyone her age, I'm a dead man. So, well, we'll just bleep that part out. My grandmother put an ad in the newspaper after the car crash. My dad was working overseas at the time, and my grandparents had jobs, even though they would come to the house and take care of us. But somewhat life had to get back to, whatever that normal was, right? We say in the COVID world, the new normal, whatever that was. And here was a woman named Dolly, originally from Jamaica. She was one of the first policewomen in Scotland Yard in England. So she was living in England, had 3 months vacation, decided, well, I'm going to go to New York and stay with my sister. Her sister, G, is a nurse. While she was over there, she hated New York. She was at, Times Square back in 1970 is a little bit different than it is now. So she hated it because it was around Halloween time. Everything was dirty about New York City, she said, back then. And she saw the ad my grandmother put into the newspaper, and she said, well, I'm here for 3 months. Let me find a part-time job. Called my grandmother, set up a time for the appointment, but didn't show up. She said she couldn't find a ride. I say she blew it off, but whatever. My story right now, right?
Right.
Didn't show up. A few weeks goes by, I saw the ad again, said, well, let me call. And since the job is still open, my grandmother remembered her voice, but Dolly played it off like a first-time caller. But how can you forget a Jamaican accent, first of all? So my grandmother was like, didn't you call before? Yes. This time, Dolly, we lived in Spring Valley. It's like an hour or so from Brooklyn. They came to the house, and it was rainy, and my grandmother made some tea for Dolly, and Dolly nearly cried because my grandmother made it like a Jewish grandmother would, not like someone from England who's been drinking English tea for years. So they bonded over a cup of tea because Dolly showed her what it's like to make tea. And then when Dolly was introduced to me, I was in my crib upstairs, and when she put her fingers into the crib, I latched onto him and I smiled. And Dolly said, "This is where I need to be. This family needs me more than Scotland Yard or to go back to Jamaica and be a nurse." And during this time, my father and my brother were at the bank. So when my brother was introduced to Dolly, and my grandmother was desperate, she said, "No one is taking this job. Will you please take this job?" And when Dolly finally relented, and when she was introduced to my brother, who was 3, mind you, my grandmother said, "Hey, Jeff, this is Dolly. She's gonna be looking after you and your brother." And my dad looked up at my father and said, "Hey, Dad, we're big men. We don't need any help. She's here for the baby, right?" So, uh, so out of the mouth of babes. And here was a woman that accepted this part-time job, which was only supposed to be, again, part-time, but turned into a lifetime. She raised me and my brother as her own flesh and blood. When her visa was up a few years later, at this point in time, my grandparents sponsored her to stay in the country or kidnapped her. So not too sure which one is accurate here, but it wasn't about religion, because being Jewish and her not, and it wasn't about color, white and black. It was about basic human need. And she stepped up to the plate and said, "I am going to help raise these kids." I mean, by that time we were already like a family anyway.
Right.
So for her to raise us, and we always joke, she loved me as her own, she beat me as her own, she was our mom, in a way. But we kind of kid her and say, "Look, the discipline you gave us would be considered child abuse today." And
I think a lot of us could say that.
Right. But it was one of those things where she would stay in my room, and then on the weekend she would go. So for me, that's all I really knew was this woman, Dolly, instead of my mom. And I had the easier transition being an infant. My brother struggled a little bit in terms of that. And he struggled with my father leaving the house for work, because one day mom didn't come home, and his 3-year-old brain recognizes this, even though you can't, how do you explain grief to a 3-year-old?
Right.
You can't even explain grief to an adult, so much alone a 3-year-old, right?
Right.
And they would do different stuff. They would wake him up before my dad went, so he get adjusted. It was all these different things. And my brother, would tell Dolly, "You're not the boss of me," these type of things. Even my dad had an adjustment, because Dolly would set the rules, and then my dad would come home and Jeff would go running, "Hey, this and that." And then my father would say, "Well, you can't do this." So one day Dolly said, "Look, you have to allow me to have this, in terms of laying down the rules and regulations, like a parent would do, in order for this to work." And my father was quiet that first year that she was there. He didn't really talk much. No one really talked about my mom. It was one of those forbidden subjects. And that's what, how grief was in my house. We didn't talk about it. I know, and I think it's how it's mainly talked in society too.
Absolutely.
But this woman, Dolly, I think she treated us better than most biological parents that we saw growing up. Even through my eyes as a child, looking back as an adult when I was writing the book and those type of things. She defended us. She loved us as her own. And as I tell DUI offenders or anyone in my program, I do my program, I go, "Look, if we had a lot more of her in this world, our society wouldn't be so messed up." But she's a wonderful woman, and my life would not be the same without her.
So when did you realize that, Dolly, because when you're first introduced to Dolly and you're growing up, she's that mother figure for you, right? Until there's a moment that you realize as you're getting older, she's not your mom. And so do you have a memory of that moment where it came to you that, wow, there's something amiss here, and I didn't realize that my mom's been lost to a car crash?
I don't know if I ever connected the dots. I mean, I don't know what age I was when I was told my mom died, and here's this woman here. It was just,
right.
It was just growing up with that type of stuff where I didn't call her mom, I called her Dolly. And then you kind of go, well, this is our normal family right here. I mean, even on school forms where I had to put mom's name deceased, it was never Dolly's name. I'm not too sure why at that point in time, but she wasn't our maid, she wasn't our housekeeper, she wasn't a nanny, she was like our governess or a guardian in a way. Right. That's how we saw it. Now the outsiders saw it differently. Who's this black woman with 2, white boys or, if all of us together, it was white family. And of course, 1970, diversity wise, it was a little bit different than it is now.
Very much, yeah. Very much.
But I don't recall when there was a moment going, well, she's not my mother, I don't have to listen to her type of stuff. It was never like that for myself, because that's all I knew, was her, in my life. And, I knew she wasn't my mom, but at the same time, she was my mom, in that way. So it was just one of those family dynamics, I guess, that I always saw as a normal thing.
Yeah, moms and dads and family doesn't have to be blood. That's for sure. And there's so many kids out there that don't have that in their life right now, but they have amazing people who care for them and love them and adore them and treat them as if they are their children. So sometimes we get to choose. Most of the times when you're born to parents, it's not a choice. But she came and she made a choice to be and stay in your life. I think that's like such a grandiose gesture.
Right. Oh yeah. And you don't find people like that on a daily basis. She could have left when her visa was up. She threatened to leave when I was growing up too. It's like, well, where are you going to go? And it's almost like, no, you can't leave us with our father. He can't cook. It's those type of things. And, she loves telling stories. And I remember a couple of years ago when we were in New York for the unveiling of my dad and my aunt's headstones, she was talking stories when I was a baby and saying, I remember when you were in your cage. And we all were like, you mean crib, right? And she's like, no, cage. I'm like, well, that explains a lot now for my life. But yeah, it was just, as you said, it's not about blood. It's about basic human love for each other. And we're blessed, she talking about compassion and understanding. And not like I have compassion every day for people, but it all comes back to what I learned from my father and Dolly. We never called her mom, because I think that name, the word mom is just so precious, I guess you could say, so special.
Yeah.
And I think she knew that too, in terms of that. But
Right.
We got really lucky. We take that horrible situation of losing our mom and my dad losing, his wife, and her, over time they formed a relationship. And then for us to have this, it's pretty incredible.
You brought up something in the beginning about the fact that really the grief and the loss wasn't really discussed. And you talk about it in the book as well, that there really wasn't a lot of time spent on that in the family, on the mental health piece of grief and loss. So that does affect us. If you don't, I totally believe this. If you don't deal with it when it happens, somehow it sneaks up on you later in life, no matter how old you are, whether you're a baby or older. So how did that affect you by not being able to deal with that loss early on?
It's affected me my entire life, really. I mean, we talk about my father, first of all, not going to counseling, it's one of those things, 1970 and men's roles, tough, all those type of things. If you ask for help, or you're saying I'm depressed over grief, then it's a sign of weakness. And not having it discussed, even when my grandmother died, I was around 10, never discussed. When my grandfather died, when I was in grad school, again, never discussed. And I emulated my father's reaction to death. I emulated that, because when your parents, you look at those role model behaviors. And it was just one of those things. As a kid, we're too busy swimming to I think they just had us involved so much we didn't have time to ask questions, or we're just too tired. It's like, just put on your Speedo, go to practice, and shut up. But it was never talked about. Even when I learned about it as a kid, when when it gets that natural stuff, you don't know what questions to ask either. And you're kind of hoping my father was going to talk about it, one day, but he never does. And it's like, okay, do I ask questions? Do I not ask questions? And I remember one year he was in the hospital for MRSA and a whole bunch of stuff. He had Parkinson's. So over time, in the 8 years that he battled Parkinson's, he was in and out of the hospital, quite often. And on December 19th, 2012, they sent me and my brother an email saying, even to that day, it was still too hard to talk about. That would have been their 48th wedding anniversary. And you don't recognize that when you're growing up, because you want to go, well, who's my father? Open up. I want to know about my mom. But when you're too afraid to ask questions because you don't hear about it. So it's like, well, what do you do? What's right? What's wrong? And when you grow up in that environment, you just don't know. And that did impact me, because all those deaths, you want to play, we're not going to talk about it. And then when my father passed away, and then when my aunt passed away 90 days later, not talking about it put me in grief counseling. It was a week where I wasn't going to see the end of the week. And not because I didn't want to die, I just wanted the pain to stop. And that put me into grief counseling, which I'm grateful for. It was ironic that one of my friends, comedian friends, were talking to a counselor, a grief counseling specialist, who was a friend of mine, about doing a program about men in grief. We're going to do like a comedy show and then open it up, because one of us was a widow, one was we lost his son, and then of course I was the son losing a parent. And it was that point in time where she looked at me and goes, "You don't look well." And I couldn't hide it from her, because you could try to hide it. The eyes don't hide depression as much as you think it does. And after that meeting, I went back home and signed up for counseling. On the form, I checked off every box. If it was a test, I would have aced it for depression. Do you have a plan? Yes. Hurting? Yes. All those type of things.
Wow.
And it was scary, because I always battled depression. As I look back in terms of like writing the book and looking at my life, I just didn't know how to cope with it. And I think men especially don't know how to cope with it, because it's not that role we're supposed to be in terms of life, asking, for help. As on society end is a form of weakness, but really, as we both know, it's a sign of strength.
Absolutely.
And once you do that and you ask for that help, I kind of wish we were going through that as a kid, because I would have been better apt to deal with, I think, death, if my mom's death was talked about as I was growing up. One of my friends, Chris, who I met, who I known since I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, something like that, goes, "Well, how come you didn't talk about it as a kid?" Because we're kids. You don't know how to process that. And it's amazing to see when there's a school shooting or something happens, all these people rush in with grief counselors and all this stuff. And it's like, how do you handle that as a kid? We were too busy swimming. I was too busy, playing with Star Wars toys and wanting to be Spider-Man and all these things, and, into magic. And I think that was always my escape, to always avoid those type of things. It's death, it's ugly. I just want to avoid it, but you can't escape from it. And,
yeah, you were kept busy with all the things with swimming, like you said, and then you got into, the fantasy world of Spider-Man and Star Wars and all of those things. So it was, you were just mentally busy with other things. And every time I'm assuming, and I don't like to do that, that when those types of things or feelings or thoughts would come up, you were able to escape them quickly between being on a swim team, which is always very busy, and then also, new releases of Star Wars movies and playing with Star Wars toys and all of those kinds of things.
And I still have my Star Wars toys. That's another topic for something else. We're not here to talk about that. You're right, because even in college, when I was able to leave Miami and go to a really small school in Ohio, Ashland University, I was able to escape home. I could free my mind and all that type of stuff. And that's when I started to really think about my own mortality. I took a philosophy class, and that just opened the floodgates for questioning everything. Why was I alive? Why? I was only an infant. My mom was a school teacher. She was 28 years old. All I did was eat, sleep, and poop. Why keep me alive? And why, take my mom and instead? And those are questions you're never going to get answers for. But swimming was a great outlet for me in college, because I would swim angry. I wasn't an angry person, but I'd be angry at God. I was angry at my father for never talking about it. I was angry at Harvey Dennison for killing my mom. It was all those type. I was angry at my swim coach for being anti-Semitic and a racist. It was just all those type of things where swimming was a healthy outlet. Whereas I never turned to alcohol or drugs to cope with the depression, because at the end of the day, that depression's still there. You self-medicate. And the only time I self-medicated was when I had to stop swimming due to my injuries of my shoulder. Whereas my senior year, I rushed rehab. And as an athlete, no one tells you how to deal with life after sports. And I felt like I was on an island by myself. Again, as a male, you open to that weakness. Well, and then other people see that as a weakness, especially guys. And I remember taking pain pills and drinking like for a week, and I went, I can't do this anymore. And I remember one of my papers I wrote for my college class, Death and Dying, was the death of my swimming life. Because I was 21 years old. And I thought, up to that point, I was a student and I was a swimmer, basically. You take away one of those things, your identity, then what are you? And that was a huge depressing time for me, just like with COVID. People, losing jobs on a day, that identity. That's why we saw so many more mental health cases and so many cases of depression last year and so forth, because you take away someone's identity, we don't know who we are for a while, and that's hard to do. So swimming was a good outlet. Reading was, when I started doing magic, that was a good outlet, because I would stay in my room, practice, doing the tricks or playing with my Star Wars toys. I was in my own little world where I could just kind of drift off and not deal with the pain and the sorrow of those type of things as a kid.
You brought it up a couple times already about men and not being able to show their vulnerability because there's judgment around weakness. And I think, I don't know that that's changing. I see a little bit of that changing in society, but I don't see it as much as I'd like to, because I think if that was the case, we would be living in a very different world, right? Because men, don't cry, don't show emotion, don't show weakness, don't be vulnerable. And it's important, and the messages that you're putting out there, and we'll get to the incredible work that you're doing through your program and the programs that you're working on. But I just wanted to comment on that, because I think that more needs to be done on making sure and rising, giving men the opportunity to really share that they're allowed to actually feel. Like, imagine that you can actually have feelings. You're allowed to shed a tear, and you're allowed to feel love. You're allowed to feel angry, but a lot of people feel like if you're angry, then that could go to a next level. And I want to also bring the guy in who I don't like to give names of people who have done terrible things. I know you mentioned his name earlier with your mom, but I know from reading your book that, obviously he had some incredible work that he needed to do. And the fact that he got out of jail very quickly. So I just want to mention that, because I think it's really important. How long did he get a sentence for?
He was sentenced to 3 years in jail with time served. He couldn't pay his bail. And at first he lied to the police. He said he wasn't the one driving. He said his friend who's in the back seat was the one driving. And it wasn't until they got to the hospital and another officer was questioning him, trying to figure out this whole thing of who was driving the car. I mean, someone was driving, right? Someone's lying, and his friend's like, I'm not taking the fall for this. And then the officer that talked to him in the hospital, his eyes were bloodshot. He was combative. He could smell alcohol on his breath. And after going around in circles for hours, he finally confessed to being the one driving it. And the reason why he lied is because he was driving on a suspended license. So in 1967, he shouldn't have been driving for 3 years. So he was the one behind the wheel of the car. Not much has really changed in the world of impaired driving, because we see that stuff all the time. Someone driving on a suspended license still driving a car. Even the law hasn't changed. So this guy was sentenced to 3 years with time served because he couldn't pay his bail. And I remember meeting one of my idols, Gene Simmons, when I told him this, and he asked what happened to the man that killed my mother. And I told him, Gene said he believed in vengeance, an eye for an eye. And I said, Gene, in my 20s, maybe my early 30s, I probably could have pulled the trigger myself. But at the end of the day, what's that going to do? It's not going to bring back my mom. If I stay mad my entire life and Harvey Dennison continues to win, so to speak, he already killed my mom, he wasn't going to take my soul, even though at times it's been close, in terms of that, because that's a heavy loss in terms of not having this important part of my life, and what I learned in grief counseling and working with my counselor, those relationships as an infant impacts so many things later on, just like that human touch. So when I was an infant, they couldn't pick me up for a while. They had put me in a pillow to pick me up. So I don't have that touch from a parent or that connection with my mom, even though I had Dolly months afterwards, but still it was a little bit different. And right. So this man destroyed, many families, not just mine, her family, her sister, lost her sister, and my mom's parents lost, the daughter, and so forth and so on. And, it destroyed so much, one person's actions of driving impaired. And we still see that today.
Absolutely. And the thing about it too is that anger can fester, and it's important to go, I just want anybody who's watching this to understand that it is very important to not let the anger of trauma affect you so much that it holds you back from getting the counseling that you may need. You said that it wasn't that you got grief counseling at 20, it's not that long ago that you decided, okay, you know what, I'm in a bad place. And it's okay to say that. Actually, it is so much stronger to say that so that you can get your life back and be able to build relationships with people and really feel again. I mean, I don't know, did you feel like in a way that you were kind of numb going through life, or did you feel like only at times? I'm just curious.
Oh, I don't know if it was numb. That's a very good question. I think I've hidden so much behind humor, first of all, so you don't really address those things. I would say sometimes you are numb, and for certain aspects, I think numb in terms of dating, because I saw what my father went through, and when people go, "How come you're not married?" I went, "Well, I never wanted to go through that. I saw that horrible. I'm not dealing with that." And so I remember the first question out of grief counseling, I went when I was 47, almost 48 years old. The first time to really address all the deaths, especially my mom. So the first question was, the counselor said, "Hey, let's talk about your mom's death and how that impacted all your relationships." And I was like, huh, I don't want to talk about that now either. I was there talking about my father and my aunt, but we had to go back all the way to September 19th, 1970, in order for me to heal or start that healing process 47, 48 years later.
Right.
And yeah, I would say sometimes numb could probably be a good word at times, even though I think not dealing with it is also a good way to kind of, to see it, in terms of it's such a horrible experience. I don't want to, I'm going to put it over here for a little bit. But then when it keeps growing, like the blob, remember the movie, The Human Blob, how it just comes growing and growing and growing. That's what grief and depression turns into if we don't address it. It's a very good analogy. I wish I wrote that in the book.
That's okay. That'd be for book too.
Yeah.
So you took that grief and everything, and I want to get to the book and I want to get to your TED Talk. But before we go there, you decided to become an advisor and get your master's in education. And so tell us a little bit about why you decided to go in that route, and then we'll get into the program.
In college, I got involved as a student leader. So I was in campus activities board, I was president of my dorm, all those type of things. I kind of really loved that part of the college life experience. My major was communications and radio, TV. I really didn't know, aside from being, I wanted to be a magician, and being a comedian, I knew those type of things. But as for a real job, it didn't really hit me to senior year, spring break, when I went, I really don't know what the hell I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. So I found out about higher education. And then later on, I found out I needed a master's degree in higher ed in order to pursue it. And so I went to the University of Akron as a student leadership advisor, where I worked with student government, and I advised the alcohol awareness group too, called Bacchus, as well. So my main focus was to get into student life, but someone's grand plan was to start doing stand-up comedy when he was still in grad school. And I got into advising a couple years later, because advising gave me normal hours of 8 to 5. Whereas student life, I would have to work nights and weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't do stand-up because I needed my nights and weekends free in order to continue to perform. And the first time I did stand-up, it was February 20th, 1995. You don't forget those type of dates. And then the second time I did it, my group project, our group was supposed to go last. And if we went last, I was going to miss my spot at the comedy club. So I was pretty friendly with my instructor. I go, look, here's the deal. I got to be at the comedy club at a certain time. Can our group go first? Then I can leave. And he was like, okay. So my focus after grad school really wasn't looking for jobs in higher ed. It was performing stand-up. So the reason why I really got into the advising is I needed the hours. And I started working at Cleveland State first because they were hiring advisors. They also needed people with orientation experience, which I did that in grad school and teaching the class. So I was at Cleveland State for 2.5 years. And then I switched to a lateral job at Kent State. And then Kent State allowed me to really take my program and blossom to what it became.
Yeah. So tell us about your program, because it's a pretty incredible program.
The program, The Magic of Life, started around 1993, 1994. And it's called The Magic of Life because, being a magician, I was doing magic tricks and symbolizing how alcohol is bad for you. Like the needle through the balloon trick was like, if you binge drink, then your stomach could be like a balloon, and the alcohol is the needle, and you binge drink, your stomach could pop. All these wonderful ideas I thought when I was 23, 24 years old. And one of my students asked if I could put together a fun program for her sorority, doing what I did. I said, yeah. And that's really what it started with, doing the magic, talking about the death of my mom, and the dangers of drunk driving. And then after 9/11, I got away from the magic because I couldn't fly with the needle through the balloon anymore because the needle was a weapon. There was one trick that I did with, I can't give away the secret because other magicians will hurt me, but
Yeah.
I couldn't fly with this product. It was a disappearing water trick. And again, so I was doing more stand-up. So I just got rid of the magic part and I opened with doing stand-up comedy instead for 5-10 minutes, because that allowed me to still do some of the performing, and then ease someone's tension. Because when you hear alcohol speaker or drunk driving speaker, everyone goes, oh man, great. Not one of these again. But it allows the audience to realize this isn't going to be the same program we saw before or heard about before, especially with the drunk drivers when they walk into the courtroom and they have to be there. They don't want to be there. And you address the elephant in the room going, look, I know no one wants to be here. And you start off with comedy, you reduce their tensions and you realize I can take them anywhere I want in the world if you make someone laugh.
Right.
And then the program just kind of combines my story, I might lose my mom, the things I go through. And then in 2004, I started to include one of my best friends, Big John, in it, who, even though he knew my story for 15 years, was the drunk driver in a single car crash, and he died. So I talk about John as well. So I take the audience through my life in terms of how it impacted me with a lot of humor, a lot of emotion, and I think inspiration, so they don't make those choices to be that person like Harvey Dennison. I tell them, don't be the reason for someone's grief, be the reason of someone's happiness and love and all those type of things. So, it's about making those right decisions, whether you're a high school student or in the military or whatever it is. We have that power not to drink and drive. We have that power to do certain things. And, if you need help, then get help. But it's a fun program, emotional. Sometimes it does get emotional for me. There are times where I might break down a little bit, and that's tough because, again, we go back to that men exterior. We're not supposed to break down, but in the last couple of years, I went, the heck with it. If I'm going to cry on stage, then I'm going to cry on stage. Brene Brown's taught me a lot about vulnerability when I was going through grief counseling. It's like, it's okay, it's fine. And that's been the beautiful part about talking about depression, because you can be sitting in a room, you've spoken in front of people, be in that room where 20 people in that room could be depressed. No one's going to talk about it. It takes that one person to open up and go, I'm depressed. All the 19 other people go, I feel the same way. You know what? I'm not alone anymore. Oh, thank goodness.
Right.
That's what that program does when I talk about my depression and those type of things. And the response I get is overwhelming, and it's emotional because you hear about their story too. And we all have powerful stories to share. I just been lucky enough to be able to share it. So the program, takes all this stuff in life and, we wrap it up in a nice bow form in terms of making the right choices, get help. Don't be afraid to ask for help, either. And it's been really special.
I know that, so you go and you talk at the courts, and you talk, you do programs with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so I know that there has to be, emails and people have said things to you about relating to you. Is there anything that you can remember that you can share post, a presentation that has, given you that feeling like, I'm so glad that I'm doing this because it's making a difference?
I remember the very first time I did the one in the Stowe court, a 19-year-old girl came up to me as I was leaving the courthouse, 19. And she said, thank you for making me realize my son needs me more than alcohol. Yeah. What do you say to that? That if that doesn't hit you as a speaker, as anyone in the gut, then you I don't know. And I never forgot that. And when the drunk drivers come up to you afterwards, donate to the foundation, buy a book, or they shared how long they've been sober, or a student who shares their story of loss or whatever it is, bonding with that. excuse me, is one of the reasons why you do it. I do it to honor my mom, first and foremost, and I suppose my father, but also, John. But when you make that difference in someone's life, you're not doing it for pay at that point in time. You're not doing it for fame or fortune. You're doing it to give back to the community. You're doing it, as Dolly did for me, to make the world better.
Yes.
And that's, I think, the difference between me and probably a lot of other speakers in the world. Whereas we would like to get paid for it, sure, but at the same time, if I'd never want to turn down, especially a local high school, if a high school's 2 hours from me and they go, you know what, we can't afford your fee, we can afford this much, I'm gonna go, yeah, okay. Because what I don't want to do is to read a newspaper from that school around prom time and some kid dying because I didn't want to do it for whatever fee that was.
Yeah.
I was raised that way.
And what gets to me is that you and I know this, in that drinking seems like, oh, so much fun. 20 years old, first getting, you're able to, or 21 years old, you're able to, first get your first drink legally. But what many don't understand, it's looked at like this great thing in the world, but it also, nobody really does tell you, you hear, oh, designated driver, make sure you have one. It's kind of like just said and then moved on. I think in something you've shared too is about making sure that you have the designated driver before you go out. I've heard you say that. I think you said it in your TED talk, is that, before you go out, and make sure that person is really the designated driver. Because here's the thing, everybody, I lost 2 friends to drunk driving. They went into a ravine filled with water and never came out when their car was hit by a drunk driver. So here's the thing, this is real and it really happens as adults and as kids. It doesn't matter who's driving. And I say kids, anybody under 30 to me is a kid. So I just wish that there was a way to really explain to those who are just legally being able to drink that it sounds great in theory, but at the end of the day, you have to be responsible. You want to be an adult, you need to be responsible with this, privilege. It's a privilege.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Driving's not, guaranteed. It's not on the Bill of Rights for happiness. You're exactly right. And what's sad is still seeing people drive with 2 or 3 offenses, on there. So the laws haven't changed so much. And, we could be a stupid society, a lot of the times, in terms of we need machines to do it. So now there's a company working on a breathalyzer that will measure your breathing or whatever it's called, breath, before you start the car. It's not blowing in it, it's just a measurable, because we're too stupid of a society not to drink and drive beforehand. And I know people like Uber and Lyft, and I don't like that, because many years ago, we're not talking many, before COVID, where we would read the reports of all these people being, thousands of people being sexually assaulted, robbed. And you're a parent, you told your kids what about getting into cars with strangers?
Oh, absolutely. I tell them not to use Uber and Lyft. Like, either don't drink if you're going to drive or find a DD, but do not take an Uber or Lyft. I don't like it.
Right, because now we have adults getting into cars with strangers who are impaired. It's, I'm not a parent, but even I know that's not right. So yeah, if you're the DD, it doesn't mean you don't have 6 beers, everyone has 12. It means you have none, because you were that superhero for that night. And you could tell the bar, tell the restaurant, you're the designated driver. Maybe you get half off an appetite, whatever it is. And if you can't find someone in your group to be the DD, then stay home. We already knew alcohol sales last year were up, at least in Ohio, 800, 900% than they were in 2019, because people were staying home. Yes, I know bars and restaurants have to make money and they make it off of alcohol, but have that plan. No one's saying you can't go out and drink and have a good time. We just want you home and safe and sound. If you are a parent, kiss your kids goodbye or good night, good morning. I remember doing a program where one of the offenders had 10 kids. First of all, a DUI would cost them $10,000 to $12,000. But money aside, I go, if you killed someone or you died, what are your 10 kids? What's going to happen to your 10 kids? And those are the things I try to focus on in terms of the program, more of the humanity of it than the fine, and the monetary side of things also, because, if we could get to the core of what's inside of us, then I think we could change people's lives. And I've been lucky to do that.
So obviously you wrote the book and you did the TED Talk because you want to share your message with everyone. How did it feel when that book, I know there's a whole story behind the book, which is an incredible story as well.
The book was scary to release it. My friend Greg Morton, and the people watching it, if they ever saw America's Got Talent in 2018, Greg Morton was the person on there doing the Star Wars sounds and the cartoon noises and all that type of stuff. Really great guy. Although he has me addicted again on video games, it's his fault. But I've known Greg over 20 years, 22, 23, 23 years maybe. And the first time we were working together at Hilarities in Cuyahoga Falls, now it's called the Funny Stop. We're in the sound room talking about our lives. He's asking me questions about my life and this type of stuff. And I told him about the car crash and then told him about Dolly. And he was like, you got to write a book about your life. And I went, whatever. I'm like, this guy just met me. I was like, whatever. And he goes, no, promise me you have to write this book. And I went, yeah, okay. Meanwhile, the showroom manager is announcing the show about Greg and the feature act and myself. And Greg stuck out his hand, and I started to shake it. And he goes, promise me, and I wasn't saying I promise. Meanwhile, I should be on stage at this point in time, and he's not letting go until I said I promise. So I said I promise, he let go. And I started to write the book little by little. I'm a procrastinator in life. It's just the way I am. I would put it away. 9/11 hit. I said, forget it. I'm not writing this book because other people's lives are, who cares about my story at this point in time? But every so often, that memory always came back because I wrote so much. And it took me 18, 19 years to finally finish it. And after my father passed away and my aunt passed away, I went, now, and I started grief counseling. I went, now I got to finish this book. I just have to, for them, for myself. And it was interesting because when I finished the principal writing in 2019, Greg and I were working together here in town. And I could finally look my friend in the eye and go, I fulfilled my promise to you. And that felt so wonderful to do. Finally, I said, get off my back, Greg. I'm done with the book. But it was, and then when he read it, when the people close to you and know you read those type of things, and for him to say, one moment you had me crying, the next moment you had me laughing, and I appreciate that type of feedback. But Dolly was probably the best. When she read it, I flew home to surprise her with her book because I couldn't just put hers in the mail. So when I surprised her, she was in bed and she started screaming and hugging me and all that type of stuff, which was really cool. So I put it on Facebook a lot, even though she hates it, because I go, this is what love is right here. Here's, surprising her. And I guess she was proud of it, but also she could don't ask me for a while afterwards, are you really okay? And that was, now I'm going to get emotional on it, right? And that was special because, again, I'm her son, right? So she wanted to make sure I was okay. And even for months afterwards, she would always ask, are you okay? Because it was scary to put some of that stuff, a lot of that stuff in there about depression and opening up and having my friends read it. And then also with depression, them not knowing what was going on because we don't talk about it. We don't want to be a burden to other people about depression and going through those things. So it was scary to have people that knew me since childhood, my best friends from college, dealing with John's death and a lot of the anger towards that, and sometimes still having that because John knew better and yet he still drove drunk. Right. So it was therapeutic to me, and I had a wonderful writing coach. Her name is Mary Anna, who pushed me to write better because when I brought it to this company for an evaluation, and I went, okay, it's now or never. I don't care if I go into debt, I have to finish this book. And she goes, well, the first draft, you wrote it as a speaker. Now you have to write it as a writer. And then every Monday that we would meet, her notes, most of the time was paint the scene. So it was one of those type of things to really push me because I had swim coaches that pushed me in swimming. So here was a writing coach pushing me to get the best out of me for this book. And sometimes it's still scary to have people read it, but as the question you asked before about the people who come up to you after the program, what they say, how this book has helped people with their own grief and dealing with loss. I'm glad I took that chance to write about my own.
Absolutely. Because people just, if you share your vulnerability, people feel like that, then they're normal, right? Because they're feeling like they're not normal. That's the problem.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm alone. I'm going through this by myself. There's nobody in the entire world that understands me. And that is what causes terrible things to happen to people, whether they go to drink or they take drugs or they commit suicide. And honestly, as we know with COVID and things, rates of things have gone up significantly. So reading a book about grief and you make it funny, right? So yes, you have the times in there that you can definitely feel the emotion, but you also make it so that, right when we're about to like cry, there's something in there that you throw in about a Speedo or something, and it makes us all laugh. But we know that we're on the, like I said, the book is an easy read because you're on the journey with you, which is nice because you did a great job in painting. She was right about painting a picture. But I will also say every time I interview an author, it just continues to push me to finish my book because that book has been on the shelf since 2006. So I'm in the same boat of just keep putting it out there and keep putting it and behind the scenes. So I
Right.
get
I'm gonna make you promise as well. Like right here today, I'm gonna make you promise to finish it. So that's what you have, because all of us will just keep reminding you to finish your book. And you need your own Greg Morton, and I'll be it, to tell you the
Oh
truth.
my gosh, I didn't mean to do that. But
Well, what you said is correct. For the comment, and thank you in terms of the ups and downs, because what I learned by doing my program is the human spirit can only take so much grief. Many years ago, I was doing a high school in New Jersey, and they did the mock car crash, the mock funeral, all this stuff, and they had coffins on the stage. They had 2 coffins, and I remember a parent wanting to pull her daughter because she said this is too much, and I said, no, wait, let me do my thing, and it'll be okay. The mock funeral was probably like an hour long, and you're looking at 1,000 or so high school students. Eyes are glazed over. My friends in the audience going, what's going on? I went, I have no idea. I'm pacing back and forth going, what's going on? But as soon as I did that very first joke, you feel that wave of laughter and emotion just being released and purged. I'm going to say it was beautiful in a way, because then they felt human again. And then when I connected with them with my story, and still then make them laugh, we can only take so much pain and suffering. Then we had a full year of it with 2020, and as we get on stage as comedians, we need that too. We need to find a way back to laugh, and we could grieve and cry and all those type of things. We've only had really that one emotion of sadness and grief for the most part in a year. We're just started. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle. We're learning again how to ride that bike of laughter and enjoying life, once again.
Right.
It's not going to be easy, because sometimes I'm still, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to deal with people, and, all those type of things. But, it's one of those things. But yeah, we all share your story, because even if you impact one life, then it's worth it. That vulnerability, as I learned, is worth it, because as you said, we don't want to feel like we're the only ones going alone. Like you have grief. The way you handle grief of, your father and loved ones is different than mine. We experience grief, but how we cope with it and stuff is different. It's always interesting, and when people say, get over it, or do this or do that, and you want to tell them certain words, which I won't on your podcast.
Yeah, this is a family friendly.
Right. But we know where they are, and it's like they don't know what you're going through on a daily basis. And I think that's always the wrong thing. And I think they mean well, but they don't understand how hurtful those words are at the same time.
And that's how they probably have handled it. They have gone numb to it. They have decided to be busy. Like I know for me with the Applaud Our Kids Foundation, I use my grief is put through there. So I know I'm making a difference, just like your program is in honor of those that you've lost, your mom, your father, your aunt. Like you're sharing that, but you're doing something productive with it to share your message.
Correct. Yeah. I for the longest time, I always said, I would live, my mantra was to be a son my mother would be proud of. And I did that for so long. And now when my father's passed, I was like, okay, be a son my parents would be proud of. And my goals on a daily basis is to make someone laugh and make a difference in someone's life. And, if I could come back into my home, well, I've stayed in my home now for the last year working, but if I can still do that on a daily basis, then I feel like I'm still being productive, even on the days where you are depressed, you don't want to crack jokes. Because I remember I would try on Facebook, write a joke a day or whatever. And then when I was really depressed, I couldn't do that. And when you can't do that, then you go back to losing your identity, and you can feel that difference in your serotonin levels. And being on antidepressant, when it was the 50th anniversary, I slipped. I was going down that dark hole, and I went back to grief counseling again because I need help again, and no shame in that. And that really helped me. And then being on, I think 10 milligrams of Lexapro. And, it was very interesting telling someone else, like an audience, and them coming up and saying what they were on and stuff. And it was like, the vaccine, talk. Are you vaccinated? Yes or no? What type of mask you're wearing? We're all bonding over this type of stuff. But I didn't stay too long on it because, again, it doesn't help. It helped at one point in time, but you have the problems and the symptoms, work the problems. You can stay on the antidepressants, but if you're not doing the other work, then they change the meds and all this stuff, and then that does not, and it's not really helping. And I worked very hard in the grief counseling. I remember my counselor saying, "You look like a different person." The first time around, after 6 months, I went, "Yeah, I feel like a different person." But yeah, do we still go back into that rabbit hole? Yeah, but now I know the coping mechanisms a little bit better than I didn't have before.
Yeah. And then you share that all in a TED Talk as well. So you had the book, the TED Talk, you've got, your program at MAD, you've got your program with the course. So this is just consistent giving back and sharing from the grief to how not, having a designated driver to your story so that somebody else doesn't have to have that same story.
Right. The TED Talk was interesting. I almost didn't do it because it was a few weeks after my dad passed away. And I didn't think mentally I was ready. And then I went, well, my dad would want me to do the TED Talk. So that was the motivation. And I was extremely nervous because I still had all these emotions, in here. And I didn't know if I was going to lose it on stage, for that short amount of time.
Right.
But I was happy to do it. And, not only, do you, write the book, you got to do your TED Talk too. So there's two things we're talking about. Now we're switching it to you, Jody.
Yeah, wait a minute. Who's interviewing who?
Yeah, this is where we're changing the tides here on your podcast. Those type of things. Because you're helping so many people, allowing us to share our stories. Now we have to help you get your story out there too. So we're turning the tides on you today. But the TED Talk was very cool. I never thought I would do it. Then how do you cram it all into what I think it was 11, 12 minutes? So that was a challenge. And I remember them asking, write out your speech to give us. I went, I haven't written a speech since I was like in high school. And I didn't, so I typed up something and I gave it to them, but I don't even think it was what I did. So.
That's funny. But your message was great. It's and I agree with you. I am a long talker. So that 12 minutes or whatever it is, when I do my TED Talk, somebody's going to have to be like, get the hook, because it's not that I, want to hear myself speak. It's just when you have a lot to share about a certain situation, you don't want to cut that short because you want the message to be clear.
Right. It was hard for me because I usually do an hour-long presentation. It's like, okay. And I've had to cut on the fly where you start late out of high school or college, and instead of 50 minutes, now you're down to 40. So you learn how to edit quickly. And as a comedian, you write out like material very long, and then you kind of shorten it up. So you have your setup and the punchline. You want to be quick with that. And that's what my mentality was for the TED Talk, in terms of let me just blow it up and then just take what's important, which is also good and bad, because then it taught me, I could actually do my program in 10 minutes now. Instead of like an hour. And I'd done that at a military base in Minot Air Force Base a couple of years ago. I had to do it in front of the guard duty before they left for guard duty at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in 10 minutes. So that kind of prepared me for the TED Talk as well, but it was very difficult. So yeah, you sort of have to blow it up and then kind of go, okay, this is the most important part of what you want to do.
Yeah, they have to make a synopsis of it. I want to bring up, as I know we're running out of time a little bit, is I know you have a love for photography and you're a great photographer. So where did that come from and what do you like to photograph?
Well, my father got us involved in photography. My dad, the way my parents met was my dad was a photographer at NYU in college, and he was shooting a school dance. And on a crowded dance floor, the only person looking at him in the picture was my mom. That's how, then he had to go up and find out who that person was. So that's how they met. And so my dad kind of instilled that in us. We one year we turned our dark room in our bathroom into a dark room in Miami. But my brother was more into it as a kid. I got more into it as an adult when I was going on nature walks, nature therapy in a way. And my friend Ray, who shot my book cover, is a photographer, and said, "Go get a refurbished camera," because I was taking pictures on my cell phone, like an iPhone 4, which back then was quality, but so I just started to, when I was doing nature therapy, seeing what I saw in my eye, wanting to capture it on the camera. So I love waterfalls and landscape and sunsets, sunrises, cityscapes, even as well. So I love the emotion that it brings out. Just like as a comedian, you're going for the emotion, you're going for the joke, which is the biggest thing. In my program, you're going for that emotion of, inspiration and that type of stuff. And the same thing for photography. If you see a picture of the sunset, what type of emotions are you getting out of that?
Right.
So I'm not a people photographer, even though some people say I should. I don't know if I have the patience to deal with people in photography, because when I'm out in nature, photography brings me that peace, right? It's one thing you're gonna go, oh, I'm in nature, or there's a waterfall, and I'm bringing myself back to center again. People, I think, just ruin it for me, because I always want a person out of my shot. I get frustrated when people get in my shot of the waterfalls. I'm like, really, you saw me standing here with my camera. Now you're blocking my view. So, but the photography, yeah, it's something the last, I guess, 4-6 years, I've just gotten better and better. And when my father passed away, my brother picked up my camera, and then he started doing photography again. So it's one thing that I think still connects us to our father
Mm-hmm.
in a way. And it's still a bond that my brother and I have too, where we'll share pictures. He likes taking pictures of wildlife and alligators and birds eating fish. And I'm like, okay, I've seen a bird eat a fish. Okay, that's good. But it's still great work, but it's just not my thing. I'd much rather capture that whole, like a painting type of thing for the viewer. And it took me a while to get up the, I say, courage to start selling it. So now on like Fine Art America, I have pictures on there. You can make puzzles out of it or whatever it is. And it was like the book, what are people's reactions going to be? And once you start doing it, because people go, you really got good work, but yet you self-doubt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things is being a comedian, we always have self-doubt, like, oh, that joke's not going to work. And then you do it and the audience laughs and they go, well, what was I worried for? And,
Exactly.
with the pictures, because it's so subjective, you don't want people going, oh, that's horrible. You kind of go, I can't take that. But it's nice when people go, yeah, that's really lovely. So, okay, I took that plunge like not too long ago. And even if you sell one picture, then it's like, okay, someone appreciates it, and that's kind of worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And we hold ourselves back. It's, the courage inside, it's judgment. And I always say this on the podcast, there's 2 words that I will continue to talk about: vulnerability. So important. We'd be more vulnerable if we were judged less, and we would be able to be who we authentically want to be each and every day. And it's unfortunate that society doesn't always allow that. So we have to give ourselves permission, and that takes time. So it's great that you're doing that. That's awesome. So I want to ask you the last question I ask everybody, and everybody now is starting to know what that question is, which is kind of funny because I record several podcasts sometimes in a day, and I had one earlier today, and they're like, I knew this question was coming. So so I need to take that. I need to start changing that up maybe, and do it in the beginning of the podcast instead. They'll be totally thrown off.
Right.
So if you knew then what you know now, what would that be? What advice would you give your younger self?
That's such a tough question, and I want to go, like a day ago, it would be better. But we're talking about thinking about years. As a kid, I think it would be, don't be afraid to take that chance. And I think I played it safe over the years, like with the book, with the pictures, and to really don't listen to that negativity inside of myself. Is probably the biggest thing, because I think I procrastinated too long on certain things where it's okay, after you do it. So I think it was that self-doubt, which was always a negative for me. So if anything, that younger self, in terms of, believing yourself more, because once I do it, then you want to, oh, it's no big deal. People actually like that stuff. But I think as a kid, that you're just not really sure of how it's going to work out and turn out. So I think that self-doubt was probably one thing. The other thing, as a kid, was probably, maybe you should wear the kiss makeup after all. I've never done that. So I was always afraid, that I couldn't draw like Gene Simmons on my face good enough, or the Paul Stanley star would look like more like a circle, like the dog from Little Rascals. So, yeah, it's such a tough question because of everything I've been through. And I looked back in that book and kind of go, all those decisions you are making, you don't know if it's the right one at that time until we go look years later and kind of go, now I know why I did what I did. So the other thing is to kind of don't have that, don't second question yourself either. Just kind of do it, take more chances, travel more would be the other thing. And probably, say, I love you to those people that really, that you care about, because life is short. And knowing that, hey, my mom died at a very young age, and, not having that chance. So knowing that loss and asking for help more. And I think as a kid, I didn't know how to ask for help, but I think I would go back in time and go ask for it, push for that type of stuff, because all those things hurt me later on. So if you could deal with that as a child, as you're developing your brain and everything and all those emotions, that would have helped me a lot better. So if I go back in time, I would say, yeah, start asking those questions and processing death and talking to people to help you through it.
Yeah, I think that's always the hardest part, right? Is asking for the help. But then when you do, afterwards, how you feel is like, why didn't I do this sooner? It's
Right.
the same thing with what you said before, is like, second guessing yourself. We do this all the time. When I sometimes think about my to-do list, right? Oh my gosh, how am I going to get to everything? Yet you do one thing, it snowballs into the next thing, and you're checking things off. So much, we kind of psych ourselves out, and all the time. We're always questioning ourselves. So I think the message is clear here, is that, about the fact that, sometimes you just got to take the leap and
Right.
start asking for help and ask questions. And so your programs are incredible. Tell everybody where they can find you.
They can find me in Ohio. No, that'd be wrong. Don't come here, people. Don't come here. But
Right.
on the internet, though, you can go to themagicallife.com or themagicallife.org. It kind of takes you to the same website. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Even though I don't know what I'm doing on Twitter, I sort of feel like my father trying to figure out the VCR clock on Twitter. But Facebook, LinkedIn. So The Magical Life will have all the links on there. You can see my promo video that I do at high schools, even though it's probably changed in the last couple of years. But Facebook, feel free to connect with me there. But that's the hub, themagicallife.org.
And then where can they find your pictures?
The pictures they can find on Fine Art America, and look for Michael Gershe, and I'll be continuing to put more pictures on there. I also have Michael Gershe photography page on Facebook. So if they find me on Facebook, they can find the link to there, or they can just ask me about it too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for sharing your story on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with everyone watching. So thank you. And next time, we want to hear you say, yes, you finished your book.
Oh, okay. Next time. Okay. I'm going to have to do a follow-up with you in a couple of years. No, I'm kidding. But thank you for the push. I appreciate it. So I'm going to say what I always say at the end of every podcast. Today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what steps, whether they're small or large, are you taking to get yourself closer to your goal? Again, thank you, Michael, for all that you're doing to help support people out there who need to hear your message. And I hope everybody has a great week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.